Nikki, it's such a pleasure to meet you. And as you just said, you're out west in British Columbia, right? So
Yeah,
what are you there out for vacation? Are you doing any performances or collaborations or whatnot? What are you doing out there?
I'm here with some family, and after COVID and all that, this past year and a half, it's nice to be able to travel again. So yeah,
Yeah, I'm looking forward to all the performances that we're going to be performing, obviously. So I would love to. We have a busy schedule today because I want to talk to you about a lot of things about your violin playing, about your approach to the violin. A lot of the listeners on the Violin Podcast often come because they're craving practice tips and they're craving good violin content. But I want to get to know how you started with your upbringing in the violin, because I know that you and your brother are both violinists. So was there like a very healthy camaraderie while growing up between the two of you?
yes. I mean, it's actually quite special to be able to have a sibling that's basically going through the same path you're going. And my brother and I were about 5 years apart, and obviously I started the violin first and he followed, and so forth. And we've been throughout our throughout our childhood, we've always been so supportive of each other. We play a lot together. Back in the Suzuki days, we played a bunch of Suzuki duets. Like the book three,
The
book five,
classics.
the classics, totally. And I think we combined joined forces again at my Curtis graduation recital 2012, and that was the first time we played together as more, I guess, mature students, more mature adults. And that was the Prokofiev violin sonata for two violins.
Which is a
And
beast of a piece.
it is,
Beast.
and
It's a
but
beast of a piece.
it's an amazing piece though. And yes, and since then we've been collaborating with different projects. We've had a few commissioned works for us. We have a concerto that was written for us by Sheridan Seyfried, two solo violin pieces by Daniel Temkin, and we've been traveling a lot together as well since then.
Well, that's awesome. I'm looking forward to, learning more about your upcoming performance schedule. Right now I'm based in Massachusetts, so if I'm nearby any major concert hall, if you're performing, I'm going to try making it to one of your performances, of course. But I want to talk about, the violin with you because you are a violinist. You're also the concertmaster of the Buffalo Philharmonic Orchestra, and we actually had David Kim, the concertmaster of Philadelphia Orchestra, on season one of the Violin Podcast, and he has such a lot of great information regarding the role of a concertmaster. But I'm curious to know what your take of the position is. Like, what are some things that you do to approach this massive gargantuan role in an orchestra?
Sure, sure. So obviously, the sitting on that chair, you're leading the my fellow first violins, at the back, and bowings and gestures, and towards the other string principals as well. I kind of hone my senses to the middle, where obviously I get my cues and gestures from the conductor, and kind of hone the energy to the middle of the orchestras where the principals kind of have their sensors, to pay attention to each other. And obviously the bass, it's always very important. They sometimes lead the timings, and if anything. So I have a good communicating signal with my principal bass, Dan Penley. And it's more like I guess it's such a common term. We express the role of a concertmaster. We're a liaison to the rest of the orchestra to kind of interpret what the conductor gives physically, and we interpret it to a musical, technical, and more practical approach to share with the rest of the orchestra. Yeah.
Yeah, what's it like working with Joan Folletta and Mr. Dunn? They're fantastic conductors in their own right. I believe back in 2010, I was attending the Interlochen music festival, as a lot of the listeners know. And actually, I remember Joan Folletta was conducting Rimsky-Korsakov Scheherazade, and that was the last time I ever played under her baton, and it was a very, very wonderful experience. So, what's it like working with them?
So Joanne Falletta is such a warm and generous person, and it really shows in her musicianship, her approach to music, and how she communicates with people as well. She's been such a pleasure to work with since I arrived in Buffalo, and especially through the last year and a half or so, through the pandemic. I've gotten to work with her even more because we've been fortunate to be able to record live streams for our community and such, and just getting to work with her in such a close knit basis, that was really great. And working with Jamon Dunn, he's got such energy. It's really fun to just be a part of his aura, and he just gives the orchestra such inspiration and motivation. He's awesome.
So, did you get the position of the concertmaster right before the pandemic? How long ago did you become the concertmaster?
Yeah, good question. So, I started in October 2019. So it's literally what
Months
six
before.
months, 6 months before. And I remember um, we were recording this disc for the disc of Florence Schmidt, works by Florence Schmidt, and I had a little solo called Legende, and that was supposed to be like our performance, run through of it. Then we have a recording session, but we ended up using the performance run through because before we could have the session, the pandemic hit, and we're left with that. But it was crazy how everything just kind of rolled. I remember, just this virus was this myth almost, like on another side of the world, and never thought it'd affect us this closely and this gravely as well.
How did the Buffalo Phil adapt to COVID-19? I mean, obviously, a lot of orchestras they were able to, do live streams. You have New York Phil, LA Phils, Chicago Symphony doing like a lot of these, live streams, and then Digital Concert Hall by Berlin Phil has been around for many years. So, what has the BPO and Joan Folletta and Jaman Dunn, do to involve the Buffalo community in these live streams?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we've been fortunate to also keep our season throughout 2020 and 2021, just recording live streams, for our community and our supporters around the country, around the globe. And we've been, there was a limit to how many players could be on stage. There was social distancing, masks on, as the usual, as per usual. But we were also able to explore such great repertoire. We started with a lot of the great string repertoire, like Tchaikovsky, Serenade, um, Tchaikovsky Serenade, some Greek Holberg Suite, and so forth. And then we slowly expanded to more. Included the winds. I played Mozart Fourth Concerto. I also solo with got the chance to play the Four Seasons, Vivaldi Four Seasons as well. So that was fun. And then at the end, we got to a point where we could include a lot more, and we played a really fun version of the Carmen suite. So including timpani and a lot of percussion. So that was fun.
That's excellent. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
speaking of the violin, what violin do you currently play on, and what kind of bow do you really play on? And also, I want to get into like the geeky stuff, like what strings do you use? Like, do you have any like pre-performance rituals that you do? I'm curious to know.
Sure, sure. So I currently play on a Joseph Curtin violin. It was built for me in 2017, and I got to know his violin through a family friend, and he's also a bow maker, through Michael Van, and he introduced me to Joseph Curtin's work, and I actually had the chance to borrow one of a curtain that was owned by Michael Mann, and I used it for a couple of years. I really enjoyed it. It was the power, the deepness to the lower strings. And one day I approached Curtin and was like, can you make me a violin? I really love your instruments. And it took a few tries, several instruments that we sent back and forth, and it finally came to this one. And I think it's really great. I'm still exploring it today. um the high registers are, it's pretty warm, and then the lower registers, it's very powerful, so I'm very happy with it. Bow. So I've been using the same bow since I was, I think, 11 or 12 years old. It's Stefan Thomas Show. It's a modern
Mm.
French bow. And, I've gone through phases where I tried other bows, but I always came back to this one. And I think the last few years I just said, I'm just staying with this one, unless something, amazing comes to my attention, and maybe I'll consider it. But it's been working just fine for me these years. And were you gonna say something?
Oh no, I just wanted to say that what was I gonna say? I guess this is a good part for me to edit out, I guess.
But
No, no, it's interesting that you play on a modern instrument because it doesn't sound like a modern instrument. It sounds brilliant, like based on the recent recordings that I've heard of you. It sounds, I don't know, you make it sound like a Strat. You make it sound very good. So kudos to you on that. And it's really special to have a violin bow that you've had for numerous years. Well, you said had it since you were 11.
yeah, something like that. Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
my gosh,
So
that's
I
really
know,
special. I mean, you've built like a special bond to it, like it's a part of you now, right?
totally, totally. The
Yeah.
violin has been constantly changing. I've played on Strats, Guarneris, Guadagninis, and yeah, the thing that you say about playing on modern instruments. I was fortunate to be able to have gotten loans from the Canada Council playing on a Strat and a Del Jesu, and during those periods of borrowing those instruments, I learned to look for what sound it created, and it was such a pleasure to be able to play, those great Italians. Yeah.
But also the American makers are also pretty good. I play on an American maker right now, and
Yeah.
they're wonderful violins.
Yeah.
What kind of strings do you use? Do you go with the regular basic dominants, or do you do like a combination of strings? What is your take on that?
So for the A, D, and G strings, I use Vision Solos, and that to me, I've been experimenting a lot over the years, and that to me was the string that gave me a lot of power and warmth and projection. For the E string, I've been rotating, in and out. I've used Perastro Gold E string. Um, I just tried a few titaniums, gold plated stuff, and it's still a work in process because I'm still trying to look for uh, I don't know. I guess for me, the E string squeaks a lot, so I just need to, depending on the humidity, the climate, and stuff like that. So
Oh,
I'm
that's the
always
worst.
rotating. Yeah.
That's the worst, man. Like
Yeah.
when in Massachusetts, there's a running joke in Massachusetts that like one day is like in the 90s, and then the second day after is like in the 50s, and it's just like the weather is so inconsistent. So
Totally.
we actually had Douglas Cox on the Violin Podcast, who is a violin maker based in Brattleboro, Vermont, and he talks about as long as you have consistency, like the change in consistency with the temperature and the weather, then you're all fine.
Yeah.
But I can imagine that when you're playing on the Strat, the Del Jesu, and the Guadagnini, I'm sure you had to battle with the temperature changes and the humidity
Oh yeah.
changes. Do you find that to be the case with your modern instrument right now, or no?
I would say the modern instrument is quite a bit more stable in that way, just because I don't know. To me, it was built in this continent. Like it kind of knows
Right.
it knows the climate, or to
It's
some
not as
extent.
it's not as moody as the Italians.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I remember when I had the 1729 Del Jesu that Timmy actually played right after I had the use of it. That one was very temperamental, like every little slight change of humidity climate, you name it, it shows in the violin. But then, again, when everything lines up, it's this amazing fiddle to play on.
Yeah, there when the stars are aligned, then like if you got the right amount of rosin on the bow hair, you got the right, like fresh strings like after their, break-in period, and then the right temperature, like everything just kind of clicks.
Exactly,
Yeah,
and it's
I find that to
perfect.
be like I find that to be like the perfect feeling, like when all of a sudden everything aligns and then bam, you sound really really good. At least I believe I think I sound good, but
No,
everybody thinks they
totally.
sound good until they start recording themselves. um
Recording's a whole another story.
oh man, well, let's dive into that actually. do
Yeah.
you do you have any recording projects on the horizon, or can you talk about any previous projects that you've recorded within the last, I don't know, 5 years pre-pandemic?
Sure, yeah. So, when I did the when I won the Michael Hill violin competition down in New Zealand, I got the chance to record my debut album with the Ato label, and that was fun. Like I recorded works by Prokofiev, Ravel, and Gershwin, and that was a project done in I think 2015 or 2016, something like that, and yeah, just recording is such a almost like a different approach that we have to take. It's definitely not the same approach I take as with performing for a live audience. It's almost a this like this lab work where you gotta get this good, and then fill it with the same excitement, the same interpretive, depth, and just give it your all, and then you can, and cutting and pasting to me is a fantastic phenomenon. I'm
Yeah,
still
Command C, Command V.
totally.
Right? And I find it's so interesting that you brought that up, because I find that, I've played in multiple recording sessions, not as a soloist, but as an orchestra member, as a quartet or
Yeah,
chamber ensemble member. And what I find to be most difficult is that, let's say we need to do a cut and
yeah,
you're playing, I don't know, 20 measures, and then you end like on a climactic moment, and then
yeah,
you cut,
yeah,
and then you take a break for 10 minutes, and then everybody in the room has to be on the same energy that they were right before the break. Do you
yeah.
find that to be the case also?
Totally. It's almost in some ways a little bit unnatural, but at the same time, that's just part of this this mindset of recording. Like I did a recording once. I was in the orchestra, with a singer, and we didn't even play the whole piece. We literally went bar by bar. Like maybe two bars, and then the producer would say, play it with more excitement, or play it more forte, play it with this, that, and then literally just cut, over the course of, I think it was 6 hours or so, and
Oh
then that's
gosh,
it.
wow. Yeah, that it could be also just an annoying process, when you're recording, but at the end of the day, once the people in the booth, they know what they're doing, and I have people who, there's okay, so measure 34, you're way out of tune. Measure so and so could use more liveliness. Like, okay, we just need to do the entire thing again. Let's do another take.
It's very you're put in a very vulnerable situation. All your work, all your that hard practicing, it's like it's so laser focused. Everybody can say, oh no, that one's not good, that one.
And the recording gear that we have now is way better than we had in like Heifetz days.
Hmm.
The microphones are more detailed, they capture your mistakes even more,
Yeah,
and that I feel like because of that, the level of playing has gotten higher. The level of intonation has higher. As a matter of fact, when I met with Timothy in the Berkshires, I was actually doing a musical production, and I had this really awesome colleague in this production who talks about intonation. He's a percussionist, but he talked about intonation, and he's like, yeah, like you look at all these these old timers, even though they were fantastic violinists in their own right, like they didn't have the ability to copy paste and like do multiple takes because we were doing digital and a lot of that was analog. And
Yeah.
I think it's a blessing and a curse that we can copy and edit and do auto tune and like adjust a pitch like right here. And I find that to be good, but like at the end of the day, though, if you're doing too much of that, then I think you might want to revisit the piece and practice a little more in the practice room.
That's true. I
But
feel like recording is like another thing of its own, unless it's like a live take or something. That's yeah.
sure. So let's talk about some live performances and like what are your favorite pieces to perform, or what are some pieces that you've grown up with that you kind of keep dear to your heart?
Yeah.
Which ones do you have in mind?
Good question. So in October, I'll be soloing with the Buffalo Phil on the Brahms Violin Concerto, and that is one of my favorite concertos for the violin. I remember starting it. Actually, I remember listening to a recording of Itzhak Perlman and falling in love with this piece, and I took it to my teacher. I was 10 years old, and I was like, I want to learn this. I bought the international edition already. It was huge. Like back then at 10 years old, my pieces were like 2 pages. This was like what 16, 17,
You you
right?
you bought everything. You bought like the book. Yeah.
Yeah, back in the day, yeah, there was no IMSLP or not yet. But yeah, I bought the solo part and the piano part at that time, and then I was like, I want to learn this. And my teacher was like, "You're 10. You need a few years. First of all, like the longest piece you've played is about 5, 10 minutes. Let's build up your stamina and all that." So I waited till I was about just turning 12, and he was like, okay, fine, like let's pick a few sections to work on, and kind of like over time maybe we can put it all together. So I remember just working on just the first page for a few months, and that itself is very very demanding, like all the arpeggios, the sound you have to make, and the different rhythms, how it goes from like sextuplets to 16th notes to triplets and then to eighth notes. Just getting a sense of the flow and all that. So that was good. Like just learning it, and then eventually around 14, then I got to play the entire thing, all three movements, and I played it last with the Huntsville Symphony back in 2016 as soloist, and that was such a great experience. I just loved the symphonic feeling of it. Just before obviously there's a great introduction, and then this epic build up to the big open the D string where the violin enters. It's so exciting for me. I
It's
love it.
like epic beyond epic. Like
Exactly. Yeah.
it's just incredible.
You,
Yeah.
I think that's like if you want to call it like one of those moments where you just love being a solo violinist. That's the opening you want to that describes it. So yeah, so I'll be playing that with the Buffalo Philharmonic Brahms Concerto, and I'll be doing a couple with COVID and all that, just things are just slowly getting back, and I'll be actually playing with Timmy with the Manitoba Chamber Orchestra in February or March, and we're gonna have a little duo program playing Vivaldi concertos, La Folia Geminiani, and I think we're doing some Brandenburg concertos as well, and then a couple recitals here and there. But yeah.
So obviously you have a very active life outside of orchestra. You're still soloing, you're still performing. What really interested you in going this direction? Because I mean, right, Timothy is doing the solo route, and you're obviously in the concertmaster, but you're able to maintain that these engagements outside of your steady job at the BPO.
Yeah.
Was that a conscious decision with you wanting to be an orchestral player, being a concert master, having that kind of leadership, or was that unconscious? What are your thoughts on
Yeah.
that?
So I guess the orchestra route, the concertmaster route, kind of fell in its place. Right after school, I was touring a lot, playing concertos, recitals, doing a lot of chamber music, and in 2015, I got an opportunity to join Time for Three, the crossover or the multi-genre ensemble they do.
Crossover classical, yeah.
Crossover and cross back and crossed over again. They're they're a fun, unique, brilliant, you know, couple of guys, and I toured with them for about a season, and that was really fun. We went and played with the Hong Kong Phil, the Brubeck Concerto, and went to Barbados, went to the La Jolla Festival. That was brilliant, really really great to be part of that. And then I got an opportunity to sit as concertmaster of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra for a year, and that was my first position as concertmaster in a professional setting, and that was amazing. Just learning all those operas, and being surrounded by some of the greatest voices in the world. That was really special to be a part of, and that kind of gave me the itch to just pursue this, as opposed to what I was doing before, and and the Buffalo Philharmonic position opportunity came up, and you know I I'm I I'm really fortunate to be able to be part of the BPO, but also the schedule allows me to pursue other projects. Like teaching, soloing with other orchestras, chamber music, projects with my brother, and stuff like that. So it's really a great balance of activities. I think balance was what I was striving for, just because I love doing many different things and many different things at a high level. So I'm really enjoying what I have right now.
That's really cool. You just mentioned that was going to be one of my talking points with you, is that you were first season, the concertmaster of the Metropolitan
Hmm.
Orchestra, which is a huge job to be a
Yeah.
part of, right? And I'm so curious to know what you found interesting about that position, and what is the difference between being a concertmaster for an opera orchestra compared to a symphonic orchestra. If you can let our audience know what the similarities or the differences are, that would be awesome.
Sure, sure. So, just from the get-go, operas are long. Operas are very long,
Oh yeah.
and
Oh yeah.
so I remember when I played my first performance at the Met. It was Don Giovanni, Mozart, right? And it's a long opera, but it's
Was that
nowhere.
you said that was your first one?
That was my first one. Yeah,
Oh man, what a great first opera to be playing at the Met.
yeah, yeah. Right. No, I was very very fortunate. Um, it's on the longer side, but definitely not Wagner length or anything. But I remember like just playing it, and right after, in the middle of the first act, just being gassed out. I was like, wow, that was a lot of playing, and that was only like what, 30 minutes, 40 minutes in, or and maybe an hour in, and there's still like two and a half hours to go, and I was like, wow, how do I do this? So I realized, like over the course of the season there, I had to approach it like a marathon, and to not give it your all. Sometimes in my type of playing before, whether it's a recital or a concerto, chamber music, you kind of live in that space. You give it your all, and that's that. Um, but I realized quite soon into my time at the Met that I have to almost take a more um, reserved approach, just to save my concentration, my focus, my energy, for what's about to come, and how long it is. So that was a huge learning curve right at the beginning. Compare that to symphonic playing, where now I look at like even like a Brahms symphony or even a Mozart symphony, let's say, it's so short compared in
It's like
relative
tiny,
to operas. Exactly.
like
So
puny.
that
Like Mozart,
exactly.
people may not know though, Mozart was an opera composer,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
so a lot of his music is very operatic, but
So,
yeah,
yeah.
I find that with opera playing, and it's very important that the audience identifies this for all the beginner violinists, because we do have a lot of beginner violinists listening to the Violin
Hmm.
Podcast, and it's important to know that it's not like a musical where you're playing and you have a break, you're playing and you have a break. The music in opera is like you're once you start, you're going like for 30
Totally.
minutes straight, and then you have
Yeah.
multiple acts, and it takes a long time. And
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
You're
I wonder.
talking.
The last time I was at the Met, it was I think about a couple of years ago actually, and it was, um, I was thinking, I'm like, like we just played. They just played 45 minutes, and we have like a 25-minute break. I'm like, they must have really need it. They really need those breaks in between. It's like, why are the breaks so long? Maybe that's why the operas are like 3.5 to 4 hours long. It's because of the breaks that the musician. No, but they
Yeah.
actually, the musicians do need those breaks because
Yeah.
it's tough
Well,
work.
honestly, some of the breaks, it's not even for, I guess, personnel reasons, but the set changes. Like the people with the people in charge with the sets. Sometimes these sets are massive, and a lot of things go on, changing them as well. So,
I guess with symphonies, I mean, it's pretty simple. There's a stage, musicians, or conductor. You go up and you play, right?
yeah,
And then with a pit, it's like, okay, you got to get the musicians and you got to get the production, then the lighting, and then making sure that the singers are singing. And it's like a whole ordeal. It's like you're, it's
totally.
like the marathons of music, essentially, right?
Yeah,
Um,
the opera is like a whole universe in itself. There's a lot of different factors that comes into play. Whereas symphonic work, the musicians on stage are the forefront of the whole program. That's it, right?
yeah, you mentioned Mozart's Don Giovanni, but I'm curious to know if there is like another memorable operatic experience that you had at the Met when you were
Yeah, yeah.
playing.
So, the Rosenkavalier, Strauss's Rosenkavalier,
Oh,
that was
so good.
that was amazing. It was Renee Fleming's last run of it, and it was the music, the staging, the just everything about it was extremely memorable. And I remember just I loved the I've before I played the opera version of it, I played the suite, which is the condensed symphonic version of it, and loved the tunes, loved how it is full of emotion and romanticism. And I just love Strauss's work in general, and to be able to play the entire the whole opera version, which is just massive, with such set changes. The cast was what a pleasure. Yeah.
Fantastic. Now I want to dive into your practice habits and your practice techniques, because I'm
Sure.
sure the audience is dying to know, how does Nikki Chooi practice? because because a
Oh,
lot of
you're stating up a lot of excitement for this.
yeah, no, I'm teasing, of course, but like,
Yeah.
I love getting different perspectives, because I'm also a teacher, and a lot of my students listen to the podcast, and I'm sure there are a lot of students and teachers and all sorts of kind of people that listen to this podcast. I'm like, like, what kind of practice tips do these people use? And I'm just curious to know, like, what are some things that works for you now,
Yeah.
because you've built so much, you have so much on your resume, and you've obviously been playing for such a long time. What what kind of practice keeps you going, and how do you practice? And I'll stop right there.
Sure, 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 sure. So, back in the day, I did, all these scale systems like Flash, Galami, and I still revisit them once in a while. But these days, I tend to pick sections out of pieces, whether it's a part of a symphony or even some concertos. For example, the other day I was warming up with the last movement of the Brahms concerto. There's a lot of scales in there, and just using that as warming up tools. So you kind of save time. You know, you're while you're warming up, you're basically practicing parts of the pieces as well, so that when you get to actually practice a piece, you don't have to worry too much about the technical aspects of it because you've already covered it during your warm-up session. So I work more on the interpretive side and just getting everything to make sense musically and all that. Um,
In some ways, it's actually very efficient what you're suggesting. You know, some teachers would argue like, okay, you need to be practicing scales and then you go to the repertoire. But you're saying, yeah, I practice my piece right away. I mean, you're not playing it. You're not taking out your violin and then playing it fast though,
no,
right?
no, no.
Yeah.
I approach it as playing scales. You know, I play rhythms. I played in rhythms. I played it in, play. You know, have the tuner on. You know, just with the drone and all that. Just making sure the intonations nice and solid. For example, the Beethoven Violin Concerto, it's all scales, right? It's basically a D major scale the entire
Story
piece.
of my life. Scales and arpeggios with the Beethoven Violin Concerto.
And it covers a lot. You know, the beginning, you get to practice your octaves, you get to practice broken thirds, you get to practice dominant seven chords, right, and so forth. So these days I would say since the last couple of years, I've been approaching my practice that way, and once in a while I visit, Septic exercises. I think Septic exercises are great, by the way, just to get the shifting really nice and comfortable. And I do still practice, Colombian skills once a while. Maybe I spend a couple days a month doing that. So yeah.
It was very, you're reminding me of a very interesting encounter I had with Joey Silverstein, who was
Hmm.
a former concertmaster of the Boston Symphony, and he was a former music director of Utah Symphony. And I had a lesson with him back in my time in Boston in school, and we were talking about how maybe I want to be his teacher. Not his teacher. Sorry, I'll edit that out. Um, okay, so this is the edit. So what reminded me of what you were saying is an encounter I had with Joey Silverstein, who was the former concertmaster of the Boston Symphony and the former music director of the Utah Symphony. And I had a lesson with him once when in my time in Boston, and you know, I was leaving my lesson, and there was another actually he had a bit of time after my lesson,
Hmm.
and all he did, like, he was maybe at this point like early 80s, early to mid 80s, and he was just like playing scales. Like, I still got to practice my scales. I got a performance like in 2 weeks, and that kind of blew my mind because even at that, like, that passion of his, it's like, it really showed me a different perspective. Like, if you love the process of practicing, or if you love the process of like doing the behind the scenes work, then everything um, will will kind of flow its way. Do you find that to be the same thing? Do you find passion in your practice? Do you find practice to be um, a beautiful thing or a frustrating thing?
Sure, sure. That's a good question. And I love that story about Joey Silverstein. He was my teacher at Curtis. I studied with him for 4 years there. And
Oh wow, that's
yeah,
what a privilege that must have been.
it was. And I remember him, every day when I pick up the violin, his approach to life, music, and all that. And yes, he does practice his scales, and he goes through two sonatas or partitas a day by Bach. He plays them through. He That's just part of his routine. But yeah, practicing. For me, I love the word you mentioned, the process. I love the process. I love being, part of the grind, the hard work, the I guess just figuring things out to make it easier, to make it make more sense, to the puzzling, the solving the puzzle part of it. And to me, it's a lifelong process. It's not. Um, there are points where there are goals where, let's say, it's a performance, an audition, or whatever it can be, but the process is between the start of it to those points, but it also moves beyond that as well. It's just something we as musicians. It's what a privilege to be doing, because it's a lifelong commitment. It's a lifelong process, and just it's the art of finding perfection. It's never going to be perfect, but it's you strive towards that, and it gets the every little step of improvement is what it's all about. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm curious to know what your favorite Joey Silverstein story is, because I mean, I've only seen him in master classes. I've only had like one lesson, but you had a relationship with him. So I'm curious to
Yeah,
know if there's like any memorable stories that you can recall from your time at
yeah,
Curtis.
sure. um I would say it's not necessarily a story, but just something he always told me. He's like, when he started at the Boston Symphony, he started at the back of the second violins, and then through that he got to observe a lot of the way people play, just because he was at the very back. You could see everything, as opposed to being at the front where you're more you know yeah. But and then he slowly kind of moved up in his years there, and got to rotate between um, all the other chairs. And he said that really helped him gain insight on how people play, and how the sound of the symphony, especially the string section and all that. And then when he was appointed as concert master, then he had this sound that he was looking for. What he knew what he was looking for when he finally sat at the chair. So that was something he just kind of you know told me and shared with me through my years there, which I found really interesting, because he really went step by step. It wasn't like boom, he kind of learned the job on the spot. So yeah.
And I'm sure, I mean, he was a wealth of knowledge, right? And then to apply all of that knowledge as an educator and as a teacher, man, what an amazing
Totally. Yeah.
yeah, what
Yeah.
an amazing time. But I know that I'm keeping you over a little bit, but I just have one more question, and I ask this to every guest that comes on the Violin Podcast. There are some people who are on the fence about either starting a music career or playing the violin, or they think it's too hard, or they're afraid of being judged, or whatever the case may be. I'm just making stuff up here, but um, what are your thoughts about anyone looking to start the violin? What can you say to that person, to the listener who is on the fence about starting the violin or introducing some kind of music education in their lives?
I would say approach it with an open mind, and to really just approach it in a way that if it really speaks to you, if it's something that you enjoy doing, you like the process of it, if it's all right, if it that's what you believe in, and if you check all those boxes, I would say that's great. Like, what are the steps towards a career? Because that's another conversation to talk about, right? Sometimes, um, at least for me growing up, like, I enjoyed what I do, and the career aspect of it kind of rolled as we go. But I feel like it's very helpful to think about these things beforehand, before you pursue it. And yeah, I would definitely, if it's your passion, if it's something that really you enjoy doing, and it speaks to you, and you feel like you see yourself commit to this for a long time, then go for it.
And to the listener who is a conservatory student,
Yeah,
what would you say to that person who's listening?
to pursue a
Well,
career.
to for a current conservatory student who is actually pursuing a career in
Yeah.
music, right now, you- uh, during the pandemic, and people are, these students are in school, they're studying music, and you know, we're on red alert for concert halls, and
Sure.
symphonies, closing down and artist management companies completely, disintegrating.
Yeah.
What would you say to the student, to the conservatory student who's actually studying music to become what you're saying, having a fulfilling music career?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I feel like this pandemic has kind of brought out a lot of innovative ideas, and sure, like the solo path, chamber music, orchestra is are the staples of what we have as options, especially for violinists in terms of career. But I would say, be open to other ways of communicating your music to the audience, whether it's through digital content, to making videos, to live streams. The possibilities are endless, and as we've all seen over the last year and a half, so many people all over the world, so many musicians, instrumentalists have come up with amazing ideas, and even this podcast, this is amazing that
Oh, well,
you're
no, no, no. I mean, to be honest, like this podcast was a result of the pandemic because I feel like there were a lot of people who needed a resource, and there wasn't one called the Violin
There we
Podcast, so I
go.
figured I'd be the first one.
There we go. Like that's a perfect example. So, just use your imagination. The usual path is always there, but if you feel like you can come up with something more innovative, more I guess fulfilling, go for it. And whatever that may be, it's up to your imagination.
Nikki, it's such a pleasure to meet you on Zoom and digitally. But I hope I get to meet you in person and attend a live concert of yours. Hopefully, maybe with you and your brother. That would be really awesome. But I
Sure.
love to, whenever we're in the same city or same continent,
Sure.
definitely would love to, meet up in person. I'm glad I made a new friend today.
Thank you
And
for
for
having me.
everybody who has listened to our banter to the end. Thank you for listening to the end of the Violin Podcast episode. I really, really appreciate it. And if you haven't done so already, please make sure to hit the subscribe button so that way you get notified for when new episodes come out. It really helps me out as the creator of the Violin Podcast to provide more episodes for you. And please make sure to check out Mr. Nikki Chooi in the Buffalo area if you're ever around. And I'll also leave his links in the episode description below so that way you get to know a little bit about Nikki and what he's up to. So Nikki, thanks again so much for your time, and I wish you a nice vacation in British Columbia.
Thank you, Eric. It
Yeah.
was a pleasure to speak with you this morning.